Hey everyone, CarnyPop here. Welcome to a day in the CarnyPop DailyDrop. Time is starting to lose all meaning, and I don't know what day it is. Oh well. I wanted to talk a little bit about a concept that I think is going to seem really 101 to the people that already know it, but I think is really important for anyone who hasn't already heard about it. At least I know it was for me when I first heard about it, so I just wanted to share that with people. And that idea is the difference between realism and verisimilitude. So, realism specifically deals with writing things realistically. And as people who enjoy cartoons, video games, genre fiction, that doesn't appeal to a lot of people. Because this focus on realism isn't really necessary and often detracts from these stories that we love. But what does matter is verisimilitude, the feeling of something being true. So clearly you can have something feel true, you can have a deep emotional connection with something which is not realistic. I feel like this concept comes really easy to people who have grown up reading genre fiction and understanding that it's something that you don't grow out of. And I say read, I mean consume genre fiction. People who like all sorts of different things, people who can get very invested in non-human characters and characters from worlds unlike our own, in worlds where the rules of reality don't apply the same way, all of that type of stuff. So the biggest thing with verisimilitude versus realism is verisimilitude takes the characters in their own context and says, does what is happening feel true? Whereas realism requires a realist context for it. So a perfect example of verisimilitude that perhaps contrasts with realism, though given how the character's brought up, I'm not entirely sure about that, would be Ryuko from Kill la Kill. Some people would say that it is unrealistic how quickly she gets over some of the initial problems, and it's unrealistic how she deals with Senketsu when he first puts himself on her. But understanding Ryuko in the context of her own show in her own world, you realize that that is completely how she would act. And even those actions are telling us things about the character. They're the building blocks to show us what is true for Ryuko moving forward. So in that way, she doesn't break verisimilitude in that moment. The main reason I'm making this vlog is to give that word out to people that need it, because I remember needing that word and then finding it in my first year of college, and it allowed me to talk about things in a very different way when people were trying to trap me in with the word realism. So let me use an example from when I was taking a class later in college to illustrate what I mean by that. We had read stories by Borges, who he's a post-structuralist author. He does a lot of dealing with like signifier and signified and how people aren't exactly, like things are not exactly represented by the way we talk about them, and how things are frequently, the way we talk about things are stand-ins for a true thing, and inherent meaning doesn't exist. We instead make our own meanings and attach them to things. We are constantly making new signifiers to understand the signified. And I didn't really get those concepts until I talked with somebody else about them a little bit extra, just to kind of understand why it could matter. And also reading his stories is where I understood those concepts. But I also understood all of the really cool craft elements of his stories. And what happened was, I had an argument with my teacher at the time, with my professor, because she was saying that there was no verisimilitude in his work. And I was saying that one of the things that makes him great is that not only are his stories, like, there is totally an element where you can read his stories as these kind of like narrative essays on some of the concepts that he holds really near and dear and things are important to understanding the world at large. But there's a whole other element where there are just cool elements of the stories. There are cool pieces of the stories. And all of that stuff reads as incredibly true to me. It just seems like the world of the story exists to have that stuff happen. Like not quite that. Everything in the story exists and happens and feels like in the world of the story it would exist and happen. So my example for this is his story, Tuan Ukbar Orbius Tertius, which is honestly up there with my favorite short stories. And this one is about someone who finds a copy of an encyclopedia, which includes it's the volume which includes data about a country that doesn't exist. In fact, it includes data about a whole world that doesn't exist, because they go on like kind of like chasing this tale, and they find out that there is an Illuminati-like group who has created an encyclopedia from a reality that does not exist, which has different language rules, different physical rules, and different countries than the real world. And what they have done is they have propagated this encyclopedia in secret and are slowly pushing its idea out into the world. Excuse me. What? And what ends up occurring is that by the end of the story, once we found out all the different ways that things work, where it's explained how if people are given specific directions on what they need to find in an area, this is a place where basically everything is done by assigned meaning, and everything is done by creating the world around you. So it literally gives people Esper powers, where if you take a bunch of people on an archaeological dig and you say, hey, we're looking for this specific helmet from this place, almost everyone will find a helmet because they will be able to create the helmet and have it exist. But if you don't tell them what they're looking for, they will come up with all sorts of crazy shit. So discerning those from real artifacts is actually a part of archaeology in this weird world, which I think is just a cool bit of it. But all of that's kind of been a tangent. What I mean to say is that this story felt true. In and of itself, this story felt true. Everything in it felt like I was reading events that take place in the world of this story. And to say that it doesn't have any verisimilitude, that I shouldn't be paying attention to any of these craft elements, that isn't the point, is taking power away from non-realist fiction. And again, when I say fiction, I mean non-realist art, non-realist narrative art. Because when you boil them down to just their ideas, when you take a story and you turn it into just the ideas which are built in within it, to me, you have made a mistake. Because I do not think that stories are subservient to the ideas within them. I think that they exist in a framework in which characters interact with each other and the world exists within the world of the story. And that in and of itself is also worth talking about. I'm not saying that ideas within stories and further ideas that the stories can end up pushing, or just things that come out through the story, aren't worth talking about. I do like those things. I like themes. I like talking about all of that. But I think that those elements, when they are taken to a point where they are above the rest of the story, can end up getting in the way of some of the really cool parts of it. And I think that this happens more in non-realist fiction, because people who are using a realist framework to look at examining stories want to disregard things that don't fit into the realist paradigm that they would use. And so they try and say that verisimilitude is the same as realism. Therefore, what we care about is either the ideas or the realism. And that devalues so much which is actually good in these stories. So the next time realism is brought up, think about the real meaning of verisimilitude. Think about finding truth. Because there are so many examples of things that are true without being real, or without even existing in a fully realistic way. Part of the... I can think of a novel right now, Catch-22, which is in many places not realistic, but it is so very true. It was daring because it was an anti-war novel during its time. And I just think that this... Again, I don't expect this to be a super hard concept for a lot of people. I think a lot of people already know this and maybe just need the word to contend with people. That's how I always felt, is that I understood that realism wasn't that important to me, but the world of the story being internally consistent, basically, and people interacting in a way that felt true and felt like it could just touch people who interacted with it, was really good and really important. I just didn't have the word verisimilitude to kind of put that denotative definition on it and let people who don't already understand it have a gateway in to understanding that idea. So I think that's all I've got on this one. I just wanted to talk a little bit about verisimilitude versus realism and how I think that this could really be, it really can help people who don't already have this tool. And I just wanted to spout off a little bit with my own experiences in this kind of sphere where people are overvaluing realism. That's all for me. So this is CarnyPop signing off. Bye.